PJ Glasser alongside Joe Malfa. It is episode 39 of the Glass with Joe podcast. PJ, we are really burning through the sports calendar. Plenty of college basketball to talk coming up because calendar turns to March by the time we get to our next episode. But first, we've got our guest for this week, Grant Paulsen of the Grant and Danny Show on 106.7 The Fan in the DC area. Talking Nats, talking Caps, talking NL East, talking the NHL's East Division. Plenty in the interview coming up right now. Pleased to be joined this week by radio host of the Grant and Danny Show on 106.7 The Fan, Grant Paulsen. Grant, I know a good chunk of your time is devoted to the show, so thanks for taking some time to stop by and talk some more with us today instead. So how are you and the family doing?
Doing very well. Appreciate you guys having me. What's going on?
Just
not much. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Where we're at and getting, thinking of where we were last year at this time, not knowing we were 3 weeks away from sports stopping, and now having all the sports at once again. It's a lot of fun, and we got a lot to get to with you, but we want to start with spring training because we know we see the Caps and that stuff behind you. We want to start with what the Nats did this offseason. They did a lot of things that kind of went under the radar. So of the things they did, which moves did you like, not like? Any moves you wish they made that they didn't? How would you evaluate the offseason they had?
Yeah, I guess start with what I really liked. I love the addition of Brad Hand in their bullpen. I think bringing in one of the better lefty relievers in the sport, particularly in an offseason in which you lose Sean Doolittle, was pertinent. They had to get a left-handed reliever and to get the guy that's probably statistically been the best southpaw reliever in the game since he became a full-time reliever in 2016. I was really happy with that. I thought that was vital in the NL East where you've got so many tough lefties in the division. Everyone now wants to talk about whether or not he'll be the closer or, the setup man, or I don't know that it matters. I think bullpenning anymore is somewhat positionless and role-less, not completely. There are a lot of old school managers and thinkers in baseball still, but I like the idea of kind of firemen relievers, right? Where you come in a spot against, an opponent that you match up well against. And I think Davey's going to use Brad Hand in a way where he's going to face tough lefties, 7th, 8th, 9th inning, and they'll plan for a part of the lineup with him and with Rainey and in the back of the bullpen with Hudson. So I liked that a lot. I like the upside of Josh Bell a ton. This is a guy that hit 37 homers and played at an all-star level in his last full season before the weird 2020 pandemic-stricken year. That hasn't been the norm for him in his career. That's kind of the best case scenario, but I think that he brings power and some protection in the lineup for Juan Soto in the same way that I think Kyle Schwarber brings a little bit of thump. I'm not a huge Schwarber guy because I think he's pretty limited to the home run offensively, a lot of swings and misses, low batting average, not a great defender, but I think those guys help lengthen their lineup and at least provide a little bit of support for Soto. And then to kind of round out the answer with things I wish they would have done. I wanted them to make a huge splash. I always want to spend the learners' money for them.
Of course.
I have no problem throwing someone else's money out there. And I don't have a problem going over the luxury tax threshold. They seem to not like doing that, but I'm not the one that's got to stroke the bill for the taxes after. But I was hoping that they would have been a player for JT Realmuto or an outfielder, frankly. I wanted Michael Brantley. I would have been okay and excited about George Springer, who was kind of my secondary option in the outfield. I thought he would have been an awesome pickup. I know it sounds crazy, but even Trevor Bauer. I mean, you're in your last year of Max's contract. Yeah. He may not be here next year. Strauss is typically a hit or miss option as far as health. Like, this rotation is going to look a lot different this time of year from now, especially if Corbin doesn't get it together after this past season where he struggled. So one of those big fish I would have liked to reeled in, but again, it's easy for me to spend their money. They weren't willing to do that.
You just got to defer it all like they like to do.
Yeah. A couple $100 million contract and defer about $190.
Exactly. And so, Grant, the Nats made some moves, but the Dodgers did too. They brought in Trevor Bauer. As you look at the landscape of the National League, how close do you think the gap is between the Dodgers and the other teams in the NL, or are they pretty far out in front?
They're definitely the favorites, right? There's no doubt in my mind, PJ. They're the 1 seed, and then we kind of have a conversation of who's next.
Right.
I think the Braves are being slept on. I really do. You look at some of the projections with Pacoda and some of the nerdy numbers that I like. I mean, there's some of these algorithms that have them in the low 80s in wins, and I don't see that. This is a 3-time defending NL East champion that I think had a pretty strong offseason. They brought Marcell Ozuna back, which was pertinent. They brought in Morton and Smiley to a rotation with really good young pitching. I think what you saw from Ian Anderson was legit. I think what you've seen from Max Fried, the former Harvard Westlake arm with Lucas Giolito, is who he is. And I believe that when they get Mike Soroka back, he's going to pitch like an all-star front of the rotation arm again. So from a Nats perspective, I worry about Atlanta. San Diego's authentic. I mean, that team's not going anywhere. Forget for a second that I can't believe that, they were able to get Fernando Tatis Jr. to sign that contract.
Yeah.
Leaving a lot of money on the table, as crazy as that sounds. But the Padres, what they did in that rotation, like when Clevenger got hurt, I thought, well, damn, the Padres are going to be in a little bit of trouble. But then they go get Darvish and they make these moves in the rotation where they're bringing in arms, and you're thinking, Snell and with that group in that ballpark, I like them a lot. I think that's probably my top trio. And then my one caveat would be, I'm normally a see it to believe it guy, like going back to like Miracle on 34th Street, like philosophy, right? But the Mets, man, I think they're off. I normally do not buy into off-season hype. And if you make moves that suddenly you're this great team, I really think the Mets are going to be very good if their rotation stays healthy. So that would be the top pantheon for me in the National League. Then there's probably a little bit of a gap. And then I would say it's teams like the Nats and probably, maybe the front runner in the NL Central. I'll say the Cardinals after they got Nolan Arenado, like those types of teams.
The National League's going to be pretty good this year. Joe and I have been talking. We kind of think the AL and NL flip-flopped from last year to this year,
sure.
Where it's kind of like the Yankees and everybody else in the AL, and then the NL. There's some pretty good teams out there.
Yeah, no doubt.
I'm glad you brought up Tatis, Grant, because I wanted to talk to you about that. He got that 14-year, $340 deal. And I go on Twitter after that happens, and all of Nat's Twitter is just freaking out about what it's going to take to keep Soto in D.C. So as somebody who has the pulse of the DMV, talking on the radio every day, 2-part question for you. Do you think Soto gets a deal north of about $400 million? And do you think the Padres started a trend that we might start seeing in baseball where these highly touted prospects, guys that just hit right away? Do you think that teams that are lower market teams, do you think they just sign these dudes to big deals because they can't afford to lose them?
So a couple things. I think it's a good question. Number one, I'm not sure they started the trend, right? Because this has been happening for a little while, if you think about it. Like, trying to think of the guy, top of my head. It might have been Scott Kingery from the Phillies that I'm thinking of.
Okay.
Didn't he sign his extension before he ever debuted in the big leagues? Pretty sure we've seen a couple of players.
It was early. The guy from the White Sox as well. White Sox signed someone like that, and then now the Braves.
Madrigal, I think, did one.
And then the Braves got.
Well, they got both of their guys.
Yes, yeah.
Acuna and Albies locked up. So there's a couple things to think about here. So number one, I do think this has been, if you want to call it a trend or an idea or a paradigm for these teams, it makes a lot of sense. If you can get the player to sign ahead of arbitration, years being exhausted in free agency, then of course, it's always going to be team friendly to do that, right?
Right.
You have to have the willing dance partner, though. And if you notice, the guys that do this are not represented by Scott Boras, who is the Juan Soto's agent. Now, that's not to say that Boras would never do that. I mean, he works for the player. So if the player demanded to get a deal done, I'm sure he would do that. I understand why agents want to do it. The agent for Fernando Tatis is now going to make whatever percent he's guaranteed of that contract over the next 14 years. He's got that money coming in. And if Tatis fires him tomorrow, he gets all that cash.
Right.
From the player perspective, though, and this is where we get into Soto, if you are elite, which Tatis is, Soto is, then there isn't a reason to do it financially. Not to go completely like year to year, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins style here, but people look at that as greedy, or they look at that as like anti-team. It's just knowing your value. This is a market. I mean, in your job, if you're worth X amount of dollars, you should want X amount of dollars. And the market says that Fernando Tatis, over the years that he just signed for, is worth way more than he just signed for. So to answer your question on Soto and 400 million, undoubtedly, this locks him in at that. What's interesting is I did this math actually. If Soto, just for the next 4 seasons, plays the arbitration game, and because of him being a Boris guy, I'm expecting that he will. Like, he's not going to sign ahead of free agency. Conservatively, and this is being like team friendly, I'm going to slot that at $50 to $55 million for Soto. He's making $8 million this year. That jumps up to 12. It's going to jump up to 15 to 20. You do all that math. Yeah. Conservatively, that's 4 years and $50 million going into free agency. At that point, he's still only 26. And that's the thing about Tatis signing this deal. It was one thing when you are Robbie Cano or you're Al Pujols, so these guys, and you're 29 or 30 years old, and now you're signing your contract. These dudes that graduate at 21, they or 20 in their cases, they're 26 when they're getting their bite at the apple. So you might even get 2 contracts. But Soto at that time, if he signs these new last couple of year trend deals of like 12 or 13 years, the current annual average value right now at the top of the market is about 37 mil. Trout makes like 36 in a hook. I think Rendon makes about 36 mil. So that's current. Now, every few years, baseball becomes worth a few billion more dollars, and that resets itself, and that number goes up. So I could easily guess that it's going to be around 40 million per year or a little bit more for a position player in 4 years. But if we're just using the current numbers of 37 mil per year times 12, that's like $444 million for Juan Soto, just that. Plus the 50 million he's already earned is close to 500 mil. And again, I feel like I'm being conservative here. And we got a guy who just signed for 340 mil who plays shortstop. And Soto plays right field and was a left fielder until a couple minutes ago. Shortstop's the most valuable position in the game. If you hit like Soto, which he has, and you play shortstop, you should be making Bezos money. So, I mean, I guess I kind of sound more like an agent or like Boris here than certainly someone who cares about the team. But I'm trying to look at this from both perspectives. From the team standpoint, amazing. But I'll tell you this, if I was a Nats fan and Soto signed that deal this week, I'd be dancing in the street. I'd be 100%. Buying pints for everybody at the bar. Like, if you're a Padres fan, fellas, you got this dude till if you're our age, like, I don't know how old you guys are, I'm 32, till you're near 46. Like, I'm almost 50 years old watching Juan Soto play for the Nats. It's the best thing in the world. It's not time to sign him.
It's great that you bring that up, because when he signed that 14-year deal, I'm 23, and I'm like, I'm going to be 37 with kids and a mortgage by the time his contract is up, which is absurd to think about. But, hey, I mean, you get that guaranteed money. That's why you always see everywhere, if you got a kid who's an athlete, teach him to play baseball. That's all you got to do. And if you want to be specific, teach him to be a lefty specialist. Like, look at Oliver Perez still taking many bites of the apple in the league.
Yeah, he'll get
Adam
one.
Kalarick. Yeah,
exactly.
But the one thing I'll say, because there are people probably watching that are like, well, this is all from the player perspective, and that's true. I guess there is a little bit of a risk, right? But I don't know exactly how it works in terms of like the insurance that the teams get in these deals or what have you. I mean, there is a chance you could say that, well, Tatis is going to fall off. Like, if you're some random dude who had the year that he just had, okay, fine. Maybe you know that you outkicked your coverage. You're not actually that good. This is a top prospect in the game that everyone for years has said is going to be one of the next great players. We're not expecting some massive drop off. So that's what people say, get the money while you can. Don't risk it. What happens if you get injured? Okay, then you still made $50 million over 4 years and you're probably set for life, but you might as well swing for the fences. Like, when you take out, because he's in California, the taxes, you take out the fact that he's paying his agent, as I said. I'm pretty sure I read that he had
he owes money to people who invested in him or something.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with what is it called? Big League Advance? Do you guys know about that? So Big League Advance is this it's actually a really smart idea, I think, but it's a guy that basically, as you said, invest in these players early. Michael Schwimmer used to play, who and then they pay him back on the back end, essentially.
Okay.
So, like, you got to pay that. So when all that's done, what is he making? Now, this sounds crazy for a guy who's like, scratching money together to go eat dinner with his wife, but like, it's not what we think it is. And my point is, maybe just go get the most you can while you can, because you're one of the best on the planet at playing in an industry that's worth $9 billion or whatever it is.
And the thing with the learners now, the track record of will they let him get to free agency a la Harper and something like that, in which case there's going to be plenty of bidders for him. So a lot to watch there. But before we, now getting out of baseball and to hockey, because that's the season we are in, do you think that the Caps have a concern so far with the age of the team and the back-to-backs and going forward? Or do you think that it's something that will benefit them because they have that experience and we're going to blink and it's already in crunch time where that experience comes into play?
So I think it could work both ways. I think it probably will throughout the season. You've seen that where they're pretty good, right? They're near the top of the Eastern Division, but they're not seemingly ever able to string 60-minute games together. And I think that might be how this goes. They're way too talented and they have way too much skill to not play competitive hockey and to not get points. But I also wonder if the rigors of this schedule, as you said, some of the fact that you're going back to back with the same team, or particularly when it gets all jumbled up. I was talking recently to John Carlson about this, and I was saying what a cool thing it was that they got this break when they were down a bunch of players with the COVID protocol because they didn't have to play in 3 consecutive games. They got a week off. And he said, well, the flip side of that is we might get a bunch of games stacked up at the end of the season, and that's not ideal. So I think the answer to your question is kind of both. I think, you bring up what is good, what is bad for this group about this schedule. Overall, my feel on them right now is that they're in good shape. I don't love that, they have 3 games in hand over a couple of the teams they're competitive with in the division. Having said that, their upside is awesome. Like when they play a great period of hockey, to me, it looks better than some of what we saw last season when they were playing good hockey. The problem is that their floor seems to have, to this point, been a little bit lower. And there's some ugly periods too. They still take too many penalties, and this season, I don't know that that's going away. I just kind of think that's baked in now with this operation and this group. You got a different coach, and that hasn't particularly changed. I like that Vitek Vanacek has taken over the net. It looks like he is serviceable enough to keep them in and win them some games. They got to get better defensively, and I think they got to get more out of Yevgeny Kuznetsov and a couple of their top forwards. And if that can happen, then they're going to be right where they need to be going into the playoffs.
More defensively, too. You mentioned you've been talking to Carlson. One stat that I noticed the other day, PJ and I working still freelance at NBC Sports Washington, I was making the graphics, and one thing that came across as I was doing my research, Carlson's a -10 right now, and he hasn't finished a season with a negative plus minus since 2014. So when your big guy like that is in a hole like that as well, you got to get out of that rut.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that shocks me to hear that. I wouldn't have known that. So that's a good nugget. I would say this. I mean, I'm not a huge plus minus guy as it is, right? Just analytically for a couple of reasons. I think sometimes if you're on a bad team, you're going to have a bad plus minus, even if you're a great player. But it is semi-relevant for John Carlson. I mean, you're on the ice with a really good power play. You are on the ice with a winning team. And so it shouldn't completely be dismissed. I think part of it was that, early on they're getting pairings down. Then you're jostling things in a blender because Dmitry Orlov and certain guys aren't available. So there are some explanations. Maybe they sound like excuses, for a number like that. But if you look at the pace a year ago where he's leading all defensemen in points and assists in some of these categories, and now you're back end top 10 in some of those things, you need that production to increase. That's not just a Carly point, that's a team point. But I think, again, there are a few guys. Like I think about Kuznetsov a lot in this regard. But when you are, one of the high-paid guys on a team, there's going to be just more focus on you generally.
You talked about Vitek a little bit, Grant. I just want to ask you about the goalie situation. We know Samsonov was supposed to be the guy. He got COVID, so Vitek had to step in. He's done a pretty good job. Samsonov is still the guy in the long run, but would you stick with Vitek even if Sammy comes back healthy and just ride him out until you eventually make the change back to Samsonov?
I would, yeah. I'm a big proponent of riding hot goaltenders. And I don't know necessarily that Vitek Vanacek is like red hot, right? There's games where he looks great. There's games where he doesn't. He certainly was on a heater earlier this season. But right now he is earned and won the right to be your starting goaltender. Not to mention, and I don't get to watch the games in Hershey, so I don't know what the defense is like in front of him, but it's not like Sammy's lighting the world on fire right now with the Bears when you look at some of the numbers either. So yeah, I would get him back into the NHL and into a game. And I let the goalies determine it. Like pretty consistently, if you guys have watched the last few years on NBCSW, even with Braden Holtby, who had won this team a cup and was a legend and is going to be a guy who's got his sweater hanging from the rafters probably at some point. Like my point was always, if Grubauer is hotter, play Grubauer. If more recently last year, if Samsonov is rolling, play Sammy. I don't think you can like play favorites in the net. I don't think you can just have a guy that's this unquestioned starter. I believe in who's seeing it better, who's more locked in, who gives you the best chance to win tonight, who's rested, those types of things. It's not to me like quarterback. A lot of people I think look at goalie like you can't sit a guy because it sends a message. Like we don't do that with quarterbacks after the team's down 14-0. You don't just pull them out of the game to jumpstart everything. That's not really what people do, other than maybe my guy Brian Flores in Miami with Tua a couple times, who I love. I love Flores. But yeah, I would ride with Vitek, and if Sammy gets rolling, like let's say he pitches a shutout, okay, he gets the next game. Or if he strings 2 or 3 together, let's reassess. But for now, Vanacek's their one, in my opinion.
And this is something that's gone way back for the Caps. Like I'm a Rangers fan, and I remember all those years when they would battle every single year in the playoffs. One year it was Varlamov, then the next year it was Neuwirth, and then the next year it was Holtby who got hot, and then the next year Holtby wasn't there, and then it was Holtby again, and then it was Grubauer. Like every single kind of chunk little era in there, couple years, where you just see them cycling through whoever happens to be hot, especially come playoff time. They've got a track record for it.
I think, Joe, like they've been lucky because they're as good as it gets at developing goaltenders. So they've had these guys they can go to. Like there was a time where Varley and Neuwirth were vying to be the guy, and Holtby was clearly the third guy in the organization. And then Holt steps forward, and those guys become expendable. And they've always been able to groom these goalies. Like Phoenix Copley has had a decent run and is a forgotten man. And Vanacek, lest we forget, was supposed to have been in Hershey all year, was the third guy because they were going to have Hank Lundqvist and Varlamov. And so this is something they do pretty well is have goaltending options, and they have for a long time.
Now, if the Caps get into the postseason, if they want to make a deep run, we know they need hot goaltending from whoever it is. Ovi and Backstrom, the Stars will need to play like stars. But as you look at this roster, who needs to be the Kuznetsov of this team if they're going to make a deep run? We know there's going to need to be like a Smith-Pelly guy, an unsung hero scoring goals, but you need that Kuznetsov kind of leading the way for the team. So is it Kuzi? Does he need to get back to his old self, or is it somebody else?
Yeah, I was going to say, can I make Kuznetsov?
Yeah, make Kuznetsov.
So let's start with, I think Connor Sherry has emerged as a bottom 6 goal scoring option, right? Who could be that DSP, like depth scorer, potentially. I also think there's more offense coming from the fourth line at some point. I don't think they're ever going to score a lot of goals. Like Carl Hagelin's got a couple points in 18 games. I mean, that doesn't work. And that's not going to be what it is. I think they're going to score more goals, get more offense. Ian and Dowd and Hathaway. So I don't worry a ton about that. But to your point, you do need that Conn Smythe performance. And I know he was named their best player in the playoffs, and he deserved recognition. He was outstanding, and that was kind of, to me, a lifetime achievement award for him. But Kuzi was their best player in the playoffs, and I believe they go as far as Kuzi takes them.
Yep.
And I still think that's the case. And people say, well, why can't they be more consistent, or why can't they play 60 or 65 minutes? Why don't they string 4 or 5 wins together? And I genuinely believe it comes back to Kuznetsov might be their most skilled player and is unequivocally, if not their most important player, one of the top 2 or 3. And he's not that consistent, right? I mean, game to game, you're not really sure what you're going to get. And I don't think some people will say it's effort or engagement. I don't know if that's the case. It seems like he's a flow of the game guy, and either like the puck finds him and it comes his way and he's creating, or it doesn't. But whatever it is, he's the answer. Like he unlocks this whole thing. And the reason why in this iteration of this group, they've made the one run, and it was the year that he was amazing, it's not a coincidence. So I think he can elevate everybody. He gives them a chance because Backstrom is going to be a stud. On both ends of the ice, he's going to be consistent. Yep. He's going to give everything he's got. Now you've got two lines you've got to worry about. And you look at they're having problems with the Penguins. Well, in these games, you've got to be able to match the lines of Crosby and Malkin. And if Kuzi lets you do that, you're in good shape. So he's always my answer. It's a bit of a cop-out. I mean, if I was going to throw one other guy at you, I would just say TJ Oshie, who I think is ultra consistent and is always going to give you every ounce of energy that he's got. But from a production standpoint, if he was able to score a few extra goals at even strength or create some offense, a player like that to help Ovechkin and Backstrom would be big. But the answer for me always comes back to Kuzi.
Still a lot of untapped goal scoring, I think, in Jacob Vrana. Not a name to sleep on either, but there's plenty of talent on the team. Last hockey question now before a quick NFL dabble. We wanted to make this Nats and Caps heavy, but always something going on in the NFL. Obviously, want to get a quick take from you on there. This year, there's no, would you rather be a wild card to go over to the Atlantic Division side of the bracket in the first two rounds. If you want to make the Final Four, you're going through two of your own divisional teams with this year's format. A lot can change between now and May, but right now, I'm going to name the legit contenders in the division. And in a sentence or less, you tell me if you're taking the Caps or that team in a 7-game series at the quarter mark based on what you've seen so far. Islanders.
Caps.
Okay. Flyers.
Flyers.
Penguins.
Caps, weirdly enough, even though they've lost 4 or 5.
Bruins.
That's tough. I'm going to say the Bruins.
All right. So there you have it. I mean, right there. Of the 4 contenders, 2 yes, 2 no. So it's going to come down to who you play when you play them, I guess, come playoff time. I mean, I disregarded the Sabres, Rangers, and Devils. Do any of them top the Caps in a 7-game series for you?
You correctly disregarded them.
Okay, yes. All right, I said a quick NFL dabble. A lot of quarterback movement already with more to come. Which has been your favorite move so far? And what is a dream move where you say to yourself, I'd love to see this QB rumored to be on the move in this specific situation?
All right, first one I would answer is what do I like? Hipster answer here, I think. I like Wentz to the Colts a lot.
I love it too. I'm on the same boat with that one.
So people all of a sudden think Carson Wentz is awful forever. And I'm not going to defend his 2020 season. It was a disaster. There are so many players who had awful seasons in sports in the last year that normally don't. We could go through baseball numbers. I mentioned Patrick Corbin's regression or Josh Bell or some of the other guys. A lot of things were different and abnormal. Now, that'll be the end of my excuse making for him. He stunk, right? He didn't play well. Everyone knows that. It doesn't mean that he stinks. It doesn't mean that he can't play. He was broken. He slumped. For some reason, we don't really allow quarterbacks the same ability to scuffle that we allow in other sports, but he's back with a guy that helped him immensely originally in Frank Reich. I like the offense for him. I think that they've got some good weapons and a great running game. They need him to be a little bit more of a game manager, I think, maybe make some plays with his scrambling and elusiveness, but don't turn the ball over as much. You don't have to play hero ball. We're not going to run it 7 times a game like Doug Peterson does. There are some things I think that are going to help him, and I actually just like that fit. Also, the package wasn't astronomical. You're not giving up ones. You're taking on a big contract, and that's why you probably didn't have to give up a lot. So I did like that a lot. That could look funny in a year or two, and you guys could laugh at me because, he continues to play at the level he did in 2020. But people forget he was really good before last year. So I'll go with Wentz. The one that I would love to see is actually Deshaun Watson being traded to the Miami Dolphins. I think that would be awesome. I think they're close. Now, how much are they giving up and what are they giving up to get Deshaun Watson? Because some of these packages you're hearing are debilitating to the team, even to add Watson. We had Peter King on my show on Grant and Danny this week, and he was giving us, from his Football Morning in America column, some of the stuff that he's heard at My Take. And he's talking about 6 or 7 players and early picks. So these are good young players. These are top tier rookie contract starters plus first and second round picks, 7 of them for Deshaun Watson. That's a ton. That makes you less close, less ready, so to speak. So having said that, I think he goes there, adds to that defense. I mentioned Flores earlier. I think he's one of the better young coaches in the league. I think they're on the verge. I'm down on Tua. I'm not done with Tua, but I was not overly impressed by him this past season. And I'm normally not big on giving up on quarterbacks very soon, but you got a chance to get Deshaun Watson and you're knocking on the door of being really good, being a double-digit win team. I think that would be a fun fit. I think they and the Bills then push each other for years with Watson and Allen in the East and separate themselves from New England and everybody else. So that would be, I guess, my big move that I would like to see.
We had Brian Mitchell on. He said the same thing. He said he would want to see Watson in Miami. Yeah. Grant, so we have 2 segments we do with all our guests to finish off. Swift 7, rapid fire questions, and then we got a trivia question for you at the end. So first question of the Swift 7, what is your favorite sport to watch?
That's impossible to answer, but I'll say football. I get more excited, on a Sunday at 12:57 than probably at any other time during the week. But there's days where I would tell you baseball or hockey, but let's go football.
Okay. What's the sports venue you have not been to, but you want to most get to?
AT&T Park in San Francisco for a baseball game. I think it's even got a new name.
Favorite ballpark. I think it's Oracle, maybe.
Oracle.
I think they changed to Oracle.
Everything out
that
there is
place has changed like
my favorite ballpark, and it's not even close. Favorite.
I've been there before, but I was there for a tour, and they weren't playing a game that day.
Yeah, I was going to ask you why you specifically said for a baseball game as opposed to what.
Yeah,
but that's the answer.
Because I went there. I went on a tour. I saw they were warming up for a concert during Super Bowl week when I was out there for the Super Bowl in San Francisco.
Once you go up to the top level and see the view seats out in the bay.
Oh, my God. It's unbelievable.
Can't beat it. Favorite all-time athlete?
I'm going to say I'll go with Michael Jordan.
Okay.
Narrowly over Cal Ripken Jr.
And what's your favorite TV show of all time?
The Wire.
All right, PJ gave you the easy ones. Number 5, which meant more to you, Caps Cup or Nats World Series?
Jesus, these are hard. Caps Cup because it was the first of my life.
Number 6, when life returns to normal, what is the first crowd-oriented thing you'll do, like a concert, movie, sporting event? What's the first thing you'd like to get to?
I don't know what they're going to do with the Nats, but I'd love to be at opening day. I mean, I'm going to a game the first day I'm allowed to.
Now, the last one, after watching them celebrate their respective titles with plenty of adult beverages, and I saved the hardest one for last, would you rather party with Alex Ovechkin, Max Scherzer, or someone who I didn't mention that happened to also get really rowdy during those celebrations?
I guess I'll go with Max. I think Max can get after it a little bit. One thing for Ovi to be jumping in the fountains and stuff, but the night that the Caps won the cup, I saw Max Scherzer at MGM National Harbor when I walked in like real late that night. And he was wearing a Cap sweater and he was pumped up. So I think he can get after it a little bit.
Nice. All right, Grant. So we end everything with the trivia question. We think we found a good one for you, baseball oriented.
I like
so each guest gets 90 seconds and then you get 3 strikes to work with. So your question is, there have been 6 teams, including the Nats, who have had a player win the MVP and who've had a player who's won the Cy Young since 2010. So Bryce Harper won the MVP in 2015. Scherzer won the Cy Young in 16 and in 2017. So of the other 5 teams, if you can give us 4 of the other 5 and name the players on those teams, we will give it to you.
Ooh, I like that. This is a brain buster. All right. First one that comes to mind is the Phillies.
Not the Phillies, no.
No, because of Ryan Howard. Okay.
Since 2010, so in the last 11 years.
Yeah. MVP and the Cy Young. All right, the San Francisco Giants.
Not the Giants.
Really? Not a Buster Posey like Madison Bumgarner, Matt Cain. All right. Let's think Cy Young's here. Mets wouldn't have had an MVP to go with DeGrom. Nats are 1 of 6. Reds, Indians. Indians wouldn't have had an MVP to go with Kluber. Tigers.
Tigers,
Tigers
yep.
are
They
one
had
of them.
Miggy and Verlander win the
Yeah.
MVP, and then Scherzer and Verlander win Cy Young. So you got one, you need 3 left, you got 40 seconds left.
All right, this is a hell of a question, by the way. This is fun. I like this. Yankees would not have had a Cy Young. Chris Sale. Red Sox wouldn't have had. Damn, this is hard. You almost need to go by division, I think, and just start mowing teams.
Think of top team in baseball.
Dodgers.
Yep. Bellinger, Kershaw, and then Kershaw
That
and
one's
Cy
easy.
Young.
That one's easy. Let's see. How much time do I have?
You got 10 seconds left.
Okay. Let me get one more. Dodgers, Cardinals.
Not the Cardinals. Right division, Chris Bryant and Arrieta from the Cubs.
Okay.
And
one
then
team you mentioned one that you're going to kick yourself for under your breath. You said the Reds and you glossed over them. Votto got the MVP, and then last year Trevor Bauer got the Cy Young. So
what's funny in my mind is I'm thinking Votto, but I'm like, I don't have a Cy Young, and of course it's Bauer last.
And then the other one was the Astros. They had Altuve win MVP.
Oh, of course.
And then Verlander was Cy Young, and also Dallas Keuchel. I forgot Keuchel had won it. So the two of them.
Keuchel Cy Young, that's true. About 5 years ago, yeah.
Yep.
That's a good one. I think in the future I should just start with the best teams in baseball and work my way back rather than trying to go by division.
Phillies and Giants were good guesses. Posey.
Yeah, so to me, I'm thinking this was like way back at the start of the 2010 window, maybe like a Ryan Howard and Hamels would have never won the Cy Young, but maybe like a Halladay or somebody like that.
Yeah. So, well, Grant, appreciate you coming on, man. We know you're obviously busy with your radio show. We love listening to it. Appreciate you coming on and giving some insight. It was great getting to talk to you.
Yeah, PJ, Joe, thanks, fellas. I appreciate you guys. It was a lot of fun. Keep up the good work.
All right, man.
Yep. Once again, that was Grant Paulsen of 106.7 The Fan here in the DC area. And you can see with his background, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on any of our other things, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, you can't see it. So we'll tell you the bobblehead collection that he's got in that background. Caps, Nats. I mean, the good thing is for anybody who is been media, who listens to us, and you've gone to games, they will from time to time leave the bobblehead promotions that they give the fans at each spot for the media members. I know that I have a Juan Soto and a Max Scherzer from 2 Nats games that I got to cover as an intern. So they will give you them. I can only imagine the amount of games that Grant has been to, obviously, as media. And I'm sure that's contributed to that bobblehead collection. Probably a ton as a fan as well. We should have asked him, but incredible collection. I hope mine looks like that one day. And I hope that I get to enjoy the championships one day that he has gotten to enjoy with the Caps and the Nats for my Rangers, Mets, or Jets. So there's that. But I do like what he said about the Mets. Coming from him, who
sure
hates
you
the
did.
Mets.
I was surprised you didn't comment on it.
I didn't want to jump in, but coming from him, who does not like the Mets, to speak that glowingly of the Mets, it's just given me more hope that I'm closer than I realized to maybe enjoying that. So
that NL East division is going to be. I agree with him on Atlanta. I don't think people were talking about them enough. They were up 3-1 on the Dodgers. They easily could have gone to the World Series, and then they bring in Ozuna. Their pitching's going to get healthy. They still got Acuna and Freeman, so Atlanta's going to be really good. The Nats, the Mets will be good. The Phillies, we were waiting for them to bounce back last year, but the shortened season really hurt them because their pitching wasn't that strong. So you think over a long period of time, re-signing Real Muto, they should be pretty good again. And then the Marlins should be the worst team in the league, but last year they made the playoffs. So some of their young talent really came to life. They have some good young pitching prospects. So that is the best division in baseball. It should be fun to watch. It was funny though, when when he was talking about the offseason pieces, and I realized that everybody the Nats acquired is left-handed. I'm like, Brad Hand's left-handed, John Lester's left-handed, Josh Bell's a switch hitter, Kyle Schwarber's left-handed. So I don't know if the Nats did that on purpose. I don't know if they were trying to give more left-handed bats behind Soto and more left-handed pitching to go along with Corbin, but they were all about the southpaws this offseason in the left.
They were. I do like the offseason they had. I do agree with him that they're definitely in that cut below everybody else. Last year, or almost last year, not quite last year, about 8 months ago when we had our MLB preview for this past shortened season, I know you were high on the Nats. I was very down on them. World Series hangover, didn't think they had the pieces. It was a down year. I do think they bounced back, and we'll get into that more in the coming weeks as we go for a full season preview episode. I do think they bounced back. I do like some of the pieces they added, but certainly in that cut below. To the Braves' point, they remind me of another recent Atlanta team. It was the Atlanta Hawks team. Remember with Budenholzer? Yeah. I don't mean in the sense of like they're going to get to the playoffs and flame out like that Hawks team did. I mean in the sense that that Hawks team had a good year. People slept on them the next year, and they brought it back and were the 1 seed. I'm not saying the Braves do that. The Dodgers are obviously the best team, but that kind of has the same vibe here. And again, I just thought of the analogy because same city. But for all they did last year, and even for all they did the year before, where people realized, all right, this team's coming, all of a sudden this offseason, the just quiet hush that's come over talking about the Braves has been astonishing to me. It makes no damn sense. And I do agree with you and Grant. They will be in the playoffs. They will be a team to be reckoned with.
Well, and that trivia question, when I gave you the teams, the best odds to win the World Series, and in one spot it was plus 1,000, the other it was 1,200.
It got me my half point back. It got us to a level pegging again. So there we go.
It did. But yeah, the Braves, I mean, some spots are just not. I mean, the White Sox are favored higher than the Braves, and we both like the White Sox young talent, but the whole Tony La Russa piece, you just don't know how that's going to mesh. And Atlanta's got a lot of guys that have been together for a long time. They know what they're doing. And now that they finally got over the hump of winning in the divisional round, they made it to the championship series. I think that gives them a lot of confidence that maybe they can even take it a step further this year. And then in hockey, also, just real quick before we get into golf, I thought Grant was spot on. I mean, you look at the East Division, and it's really a 5-team race. It's Paulsen, Philly, Washington, Pittsburgh, and the Islanders. Islanders beat Boston 7-2 last night. So, I mean, that's what it is. You got to get as many wins as regulation as you can. There are going to be some eye-popping scores some nights, but that, like the NL East is going to be the best division in baseball. That is the best division.
Hey, the Eastern divisions are making up for the NFC East in the other sports. NFC East was so bad, and now the NL East and the NHL East are making up for it.
That's a good point. But yeah, Joe, obviously we got to talk a little bit of golf and some sad news this week when we heard about Tiger. Thankfully, he is alive, most importantly, but he has 2 broken legs. He shattered both of his ankles, and you just, thankfully, like I said, he's alive, and then he's not paralyzed, so he'll be able to walk again. But I thought a bunch of the golfers were spot on when people were interviewing him this week. I heard Brooks Koepka talking about 90% of the guys out here are Tiger. We're playing golf because of Tiger. Rory, his comment about that he's not Superman, and, we shouldn't be asking ourselves, when will he come back to play golf? We're just happy that he's still here with us. And then Webb Simpson too, saying that he was just glad that Tiger's kids still have a father, and that's the important stuff. Because the pictures of the car, it obviously could have been a lot worse.
It reminded me of, and I was mad when people were making this comparison, but like I said, obvious comparison to draw just to have, because they're of that same stature. The images from above, you had that same eerie feel, like what happened with Kobe and what happened with Tiger. And it started the same way. Like, it was just like one small Twitter account mentioned it, and everybody was like, nah. And then more people started saying it. And then all of a sudden you see the images of it on SportsCenter, and you're like, oh my God, I don't care about golf at all. I'm just glad he's alive. Because if you saw that car, and I'm sure anybody who listens to this is a sports fan in some way, or they just like us very much, which isn't very many people. Sure, you're a sports fan. You saw the pictures of that car, and the first thing you had to have said to yourself as well is like, I can't believe he got out alive.
Yeah.
And the deputy who was on SportsCenter, I believe his name was Carlos Gonzalez, credit him properly. He was on SportsCenter, and he said he was the first one to respond to the scene. And it's, there was no alcohol. There was no, initially they said there was no alcohol. There was no influence. It's just a very busy, dangerous stretch of roadway where he has seen many worse accidents than that. And an ESPN reporter then the following day went ahead and drove that road just to see it. And he said, without even realizing, he was going 60 in that 45 because it's just a downhill slope freak accident. For all the details that came out, again, to reiterate what you said, just glad he's alive. I don't even want to hear anybody ask about when he is going to ever play again or if he ever is going to play again. We cross that bridge when we get there. He's alive. He's well, hopefully, from all accounts so far, a few days in already, and that's all that matters. Michael Eve, Sports Center anchor.
I was just going to talk about that.
I really hope it comes to fruition. All the players this Sunday wear red to honor him. That would be incredible, touching moment. And again, just thoughts and prayers to Tiger and his family. You see images like that, and you are reminded how fragile life is, and that golf is the least important thing right now.
And it's the golf tournament this week is a WGC, which means there's no cut. Every golfer gets to play all 4 rounds. So the fact that all the golfers get to make it to a Sunday, I just think for all of them to be able to wear red would be really, really freaking cool. I thought that was a great idea when I saw that too.
Of course.
So best wishes to Tiger. Hopefully he keeps recovering well, and just glad that he's still here for sure. No easy transition from that, Joe, but we'll try. As we move over to college hoops, like you said, March Madness is only a couple days away. And we're starting to get heated about certain things, me and you. We're texting back and forth with each other. We've had our disagreements about the Big Ten. And then last night we had our disagreements about Michigan State. We can both agree that they're playing really well right now.
Yes, we're going to get to that in a second. Before that, I just wanted to point out the new bracketology this morning did come out from Joe Lenardi. We will get to that as well. Obviously, a ton to digest. The main things to hit on, despite the loss to Michigan State, Ohio State is still on a 1 line, along with Baylor, Michigan, and Gonzaga. So nothing at the top changed, even though Michigan State did beat Ohio State last night. And then there's plenty to digest beyond that. But the main 1 lines, they all stayed the same way. And PJ, I have a surprise for you today, because you, in our text message chain last night as we were debating this, you teased some big point that you had about the argument we were having, and I needed to have our resident everything Swiss Army knife. We had him on as a full guest one time for all Ravens talk, Ryan Wormley, and friend of the pod, avid college basketball fan like us. I wanted him here to hear
the more the merrier. If you would invite the whole University of Maryland to come to my TED Talk, by all means, I'm all here for it.
So to preface this, we were arguing last night about Michigan State. I don't believe they are some top team, but I do think they have, in the way that Duke has been dumped on all year, I think Michigan State was overrated, yet also better than people gave them credit for early on, to which PJ just said they were garbage all year until the last 2 weeks. And now PJ said that he has some point to give here. I'll let him give that, and I'll give my side of the argument. Worm, you're here as a judge, and chime in whenever you want.
So my point isn't necessarily towards Michigan State. It's about the Big Ten and college basketball as a whole, okay? And I haven't heard anybody make this point, and I'm just thinking about it last night driving home from work, because I've been trying to explain to you guys how I'm seeing things, and I think this is the best way to do it. College basketball this season is the same as college football. You have 3 elite teams, Gonzaga, Baylor, and Michigan. And in college football, you had Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. And then that number 4 team was up for debate. In college football, it was Notre Dame, but not a lot of people felt like it was Notre Dame. Some people thought it was Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Florida. College basketball right now, some people think it's Ohio State. Some people think it's Alabama, Iowa, Illinois, Villanova, whoever. So the way people view Notre Dame in college football, and we all agreed that Notre Dame was a good team. They were 10-0. Whether or not they deserved the 4th spot was up for interpretation, but they were a good team. But a lot of people said that Notre Dame stunk. And Notre Dame didn't stink. They were a good team. But when you were trying to view them in the big picture towards those other top 3 teams, people knew that Notre Dame could not hang with those 3 teams. So when I keep telling you that Iowa and Illinois stink, it's not that I think they're bad teams. I just think that everybody's talking about them, whether you turn on ESPN and listen to Jay Billis or Dan Dockich or Seth Greenberg, and an Iowa highlight comes on or an Illinois highlight comes on. And they're like, oh, this is a team that can make the Final Four and go all the way. And I just see them as people saw Notre Dame. And I could be wrong, but when I say they stink, that's what I mean. I just feel like they're overvalued in the way people are looking at them big picture. One more thing I'll say is that if Iowa or Illinois were to lose in the NCAA tournament, I would say to myself, that team's not as good as I thought they were. If Gonzaga or Baylor or Michigan were to lose, I feel like whoever took them off would be whoever beat them. We would be saying that team is whoever beat them. That team was really good that beat them. So I think it's that. You look at the SEC in college football, you look at the Big Ten in college basketball, they're the same. Alabama was Michigan. You have 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10. Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio State. You had 4 top 10 teams in the SEC, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Texas A&M. It's the same thing. A lot of people thought the SEC was overrated. They thought Alabama was great, but maybe Texas A&M wasn't the number 5 team. Georgia didn't really beat anybody. Florida's offense was great, but their defense wasn't great. Sounds like Iowa, doesn't it? So there's a lot of similarities between college basketball and college football. So I was thinking about it, and I'm like, that's probably the best way I can illustrate it, is when I say teams stink, look at them as people looked at Notre Dame in college football, in the sense that they're a good team, but now we have to put them in the championship view, how we view them along with the nation's best teams. And that's how I see it.
I'm just going to interject before Joe goes here. PJ, you kind of had me going along there for a little bit of that. I like some of the comparisons you were making, but you totally lose me when you say that if a team loses in the flukiest postseason in sports in a single elimination March Madness, that you're going to evaluate them differently in terms of how good they were over the season. Like, teams don't go undefeated. Nobody's done it since Indiana 40 years ago. You're going to lose at some point. If it happens to happen in March, in, again, an extremely fluky environment that is even more fluky this year because of all the COVID considerations, I'm just not going to think that they're worse because of that.
And that's the thing that we keep coming back to, where the disconnect is, where Worm and I agree and PJ, you don't. When we're talking about the Big Ten, we're not gauging success based on how many of those teams make the Elite Eight or Final Four. That's what you keep saying, your barometers. You keep saying, oh, the Big Ten is overvalued. If they're lucky, they'll get 1 team in the Final Four. Well, there's only 4 teams that make the Final Four, and especially this year where Gonzaga's from a conference that nobody cares about, you're already going to discount a bunch of big conferences because of the fact that there's only 4 spots. You're putting a WAC team in there, or WCC, whatever they are. It's an acronym that starts with a W. You're putting them in there, so you're taking another spot away. So obviously, there's going to be these big conferences that are left out, and it's not really. I don't see it as an indictment if Ohio State, Michigan, and Illinois, if none of them make the Final Four, if none of them make it, it's not really an indictment, because it's so fluky. That Virginia team that lost to UMBC, I didn't turn around and say, oh, they're worse than we thought they were. No, it was a 99 times out of 100 they beat UMBC. That night was the one. In such a fluky tournament like this, I'm not going to say the whole season we just had means nothing, because Michigan loses to an 8-seeded or an 11-seeded Drake team or something. I don't know if that's a matchup, just an example off the top of my head. If they lose to Drake in the second round, I'm not going to say, well, Michigan was a fluke all year and the Big Ten is weak. Like, no, it was a 1-game scenario in the flukiest of all tournaments. So that's where the disconnect is, where we see it as, we want to see what you do all year in the regular season. I want to see how many teams from a conference make the tournament. I want to see how many teams are ranked, how many of them are seeded highly. At the end of the year, that's where I cut off my barometer of which conferences were the strongest this year. I make that evaluation at the end of the regular season, and then the postseason is what it is. It's almost like how MVP and whatever are regular season awards. I'm dishing out my strongest conferences and whatnot at the end of the regular season.
And I get that. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, like, to play it out differently, not just that Michigan could lose to like an 11-seeded Drake, like Joe said, but maybe they lose to a 2-seeded Illinois. I mean, and then only one of those 2 teams that they're playing in the Elite Eight can make it to the Final Four. So when you get 10 teams in, they're bound to face each other at some point over the course of the bracket. And to expand it further to just the Final Four, a lot of people like to say that the Big Ten isn't on the elite tier of conferences because they haven't had a national championship winner since 2000, I mean, 2002 kind of with Maryland,
Yeah.
obviously they were in ACC at the time. I just had to point that out.
And they played, and who did they play in that final?
Indiana, of course.
Okay.
So a lot of people like to point that out, but let's say Gonzaga wins the title this year. They're clearly the best team in the country. They're obviously going to be the heavy favorite going in. Does that mean the WCC, which it is a WCC, Joe, not the WAC? Does that mean the WCC? Does that mean they're better than the Big Ten just because they have a more recent national championship contender? No, it's about the depth of the conference. It's about the larger sample size of an entire regular season. You guys know I like to talk about things like sample size and numbers, and we're sort of texting this as well. But KenPom solved college basketball. There are too many data points for the human brain to consider in an entire season of college basketball. Games played at different levels, different conferences, different venues, to truly examine it and say, my eye test can tell me like who the true best teams are. Now, your eye test can say Gonzaga is better than like, Loyola Marymount or whatever, but it can't evaluate on the margins as well as a computer can. And there's a reason like Vegas always knows. They know because they trust KenPom numbers and they trust efficiency. That's what matters in college basketball. And the Big Ten, by those numbers, by KenPom, is the second best conference they have ever evaluated. Behind only, I think it's the 04 ACC or 05. It's a conference from a long time ago, but they are blowing every other conference out of the water.
And to follow up on that, after last night's games came in and the numbers recalculated, Big Ten has 14 teams. People forget that because it's the Big Ten, but it's got 14 teams. 10 of the 14 teams are in the top 35. That's absurd.
I've never said to you it isn't the best conference in college basketball. I just feel like some of the teams in the conference are overvalued.
Yes, I get that. But there's the other part of that argument that you have been bringing up. You brought it up on last week's show too, when it was just you and I. The other part of that argument that you brought up is you don't give the Big Ten any credit because you don't think they'll do it in March. And that's a totally separate argument.
Well, how do you evaluate a team? How do you evaluate a conference? I get you evaluate them with their body of work
season. That's it.
And what they do in the regular season. But the postseason has to matter a little bit. I get it's fluky and anything can happen. But at the end of the day, you gotta some teams have to win.
This is the only sport postseason where, in terms of evaluating overall strength of a conference, I'm putting no stock in the postseason because it is so fluky, because 15 seeds beat 2 seeds and we don't bat an eye. The Florida Gulf Coast against Georgetown, the Lehighs against Duke, and so on and so on. We don't bat an eye when those things happen.
And March Madness is an entertainment product. I think even the NCAA would tell you that it's not designed to determine who the best team in college basketball was.
If it were designed to be
most years the best team doesn't win.
Yeah, if it was designed to be who the best team in college basketball was, they would chop off a couple of regular season games. And I've been saying this, we haven't really talked about it because it's not really ever talked about at all because nobody's ever touching March Madness. But if you wanted it to be truly the best and really evaluate it, your first 2 rounds, you do single game. Are 15 is going to upset 2? It's going to happen. It shouldn't, but it's going to happen. First 2 rounds, the first weekend, essentially, you do that. Second weekend, best of 3. Final 4 is best of 5. And that's how you do it. You chop off a few regular season games, and then getting to those numbers isn't too taxing on the players. It's going to generate more money for the NCAA. So like I said, first weekend, single game elimination. Second weekend, best of 3. Final 4, best of 5. That's the way to do it.
Let me ask you this too. If Maryland plays, let's see, Loyola Chicago in the 8-9 game, how many people are going to look at that game and say, oh, Maryland's a Big Ten team. They've beaten this team, and this team, and that's why I'm taking them?
I think a lot.
Right.
I think a lot.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is there's this perception because they played in this conference and because they beat these teams that they're automatically better than that team.
How could you not perceive that when, again, 10 of the top 35 KenPom teams are Big Ten teams that they've played and that they've beat? And this goes for other teams in the Big Ten. Like, same thing, Michigan State, now that they're getting hot. If they sneak in and they're a 12 seed, say they're in the playing game and then they make it as a 12 seed. If they're playing like a 6-seeded, USC team, would it not be viable to say, well, the Pac-12 kind of sucks overall. Michigan State is in a better conference, battle tested every single night. beat Ohio State, beat Illinois.
But again, that's my point. USC is in a bad conference. Does that make them a bad team? That's been my point, is you have to look at these teams face value. I get the conference is great, but the teams as themselves, are they as good as people say they are?
I think it's not that great.
It's not that those teams are.
What is the conference made out of? The conference is made out of those teams. It's those teams that make the conference great.
And they're all good teams. I just don't think they're as good as everybody thinks they are.
I think when you're in a bad conference, you just know it's more of a question mark. You know less about them as a fan. We know that Maryland is facing the best of the best every single night. They don't have any easy games outside of their home state of Nebraska.
Right,
every other game they've played has been an absolute battle. Whereas a team in the Pac-12 or even a Gonzaga, who I'm certainly not knocking, again, I think they're obviously the best team in the country. I do think it's easier to blow out bad teams than it is to win by 7 points against a really good team. And that's what the teams in the Big Ten have been doing. They've been winning close, tough, hard-fought games all season long, literally every single game, just about. Whereas a team, like Loyola Chicago, how much stiff competition are they facing in the Missouri Valley?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, the Terps play a ranked team every single night. So to just say they're better because they have more wins against ranked team, because they've had more opportunities.
But they're actually beating those ranked teams. If they were a bad team, they would be losing those games.
And it's cliche, but it goes back to the whole thing of iron sharpens iron. There's a reason that all these people who have played the game before bring it up. It's a reason that, PJ, you could appreciate this. People always love the SEC in football. When you're playing these best of the best teams on a nightly basis, it's going to get your team better. If you take Maryland, we use them as an example because two of us went there and we love them. If you take Maryland and you had them in the Big Ten versus having them in the WCC with Gonzaga, at the end of the year, the Maryland in this universe is going to be much better than the Maryland in the parallel universe of being in the WCC, because in the WCC, they can coast. They can just beat up on bad teams. They're not really talking about honing their skills. Practices probably aren't going to be as hard as it is in the Big Ten. At the end of the year, then, your final product is a much better team. And that's why when you are making your bracket, you should be taking into consideration, oh, this team went through the Big Ten. I'm trusting them over team A because of that, because you are getting better every single night. And again, I can't harp on that enough. That is what is building. That's part of the reason that you don't see, I feel at least, a lot of teams from lesser conferences. Take Gonzaga as the prime example. When did Gonzaga win a national title?
They have not won one.
They haven't won one. They've been so great every single year, but I think the difference is, sure, there's a matter of luck. It's the flukiest tournament, but there's got to be a part of you that turns around and says, well, if you're coasting through all these teams throughout the whole season, St. Mary's, San Francisco, Pepperdine, and now all of a sudden you're going to turn around and, based on Lenardi's bracket today, just for example, not saying Maryland would beat Gonzaga because Gonzaga will smoke Maryland, but in the second round, Gonzaga versus Maryland. Maryland will immediately be the best team that Gonzaga has played since conference play started. And it's not even close.
Right.
So when you go from those cupcakes to that, and then now in the third round, you're going to face either Virginia or USC. That's where the difference comes in, and why you take stock in those tougher conferences than necessarily that top team.
Yeah, if Maryland does face Gonzaga, I'm certainly not going to pick them to win, but I'm definitely going to take them to cover the first half, because it's going to be a culture shock almost to be, oh, wow, this is a team that can actually pass and has athletes and talent and real coaching. And like Joe said, that's not a team that
we could debate the real coach.
Gonzaga's face.
See,
that's a longer debate.
I get what you guys are saying about the conferences and playing in a certain conference and how it makes you better, but you also know that college basketball is all about matchups. And I think it's just unfair to say sometimes there's conference fatigue, and when there's so much familiarity and you're so used to playing a certain style of basketball, that can hurt you when you get to the tournament and you go against certain teams that play a completely different style of ball. So I see what you're saying. And again, the Big Ten is the best conference in college basketball. But when you look at those Gonzaga teams, I mean, again, who's the best pro player that Mark Few's ever had. It's probably Rui, right? Adam Morrison was phenomenal, but in the NBA he flamed out. So now he's getting guys like Suggs and Kispert and Timmy. So the talent is finally That's why I can't wait for the tournament this year, because if Gonzaga doesn't win it this year, then Mark Few should be pretty worried.
I want to also make the point that a lot of the Big Ten teams that PJ is concerned about, like, Iowa, they don't play defense nearly as well as they can score. Illinois is up and down, really inconsistent night to night. Teams like that, we're not comparing them to whatever their ideal form is. We're comparing them to what the actual teams in college basketball are this year. And maybe they are flawed. In fact, they are definitely flawed. But college basketball teams, even the great ones, are flawed every year. If they were perfect, they'd be playing at the professional level, not in college. And relative to their competition, the Big Ten has been just smoking them. And it's been far away the best in college basketball, even if maybe in a different year, the gap in relative value wouldn't be as wide. But again, this is a COVID year. Things are different. Duke and Michigan State and Kentucky and Kansas have all struggled this year. UNC struggled. All the Blue Bloods have not been that great this year. Those are teams that rely on freshmen a lot of the time, and they come together and gel as the season goes along. And that's why we're seeing Duke and Michigan State get better as it's gone along, because these freshmen are finally getting practice time.
And that's how I was going to segue us into the Michigan State debate here before we let you go, Worm, because that was the other big hot topic. That's, you're going to see it on SportsCenter all day. We released this episode Saturday. It's going to be a big talk all day Saturday ahead of the game against Maryland on Sunday. PJ, I want to get what you gauge as like a viable team, because we were going through this last night with Michigan State, and Worm, to your point about like
just like all season, a team that's been good.
The questions about Illinois and Iowa, part of that is because they're going up against the quote unquote bottom teams that are Michigan State. Now, the debate we were having last night, I've said that Michigan State all year, I've thought of them as a team early season overranked. They were never the number 4 team in the country, which is, I believe, as high as they got. But they were playing night in, night out like a consistent 7 to 10 seed. And when I was talking about this to PJ yesterday and to Davey Siegel, last week's guest, who is a big Michigan State fan, they said Michigan State has been garbage all year. And I just don't get the sentiment there. You go back and you look, and I watched 7 of their early 12 games because I had money on 6 of them. They, early on, were they playing to their rank? No. But they were, again, like I said, playing as a 7 to 10 seed. They were 8-4. 4 of their 4 losses, 2 of them were against a top 10 Wisconsin team, a number 21 Minnesota team on the road, who also smoked Michigan, and is Michigan's only loss. Their other loss was a buzzer beater against Purdue, who has been ranked this year. And then their 4th loss was against Northwestern during Northwestern's hot stretch before Darren Ravel jinxed them on Twitter, and they've lost like every game since. And their 8 wins, did they play anybody marquee? Really? No. You play who's in front of you. They beat a Notre Dame team who's pesky, and again, throughout the year, they faded with COVID issues. They beat Duke in Duke's 3rd game of the year. This was before Duke got bad. Duke was still solid early on. They hit that.
Do we know if they were ever good, though? That's the thing.
They were never elite. And again, Duke, like Michigan State, didn't play to their rank, but they played to where I think they could be seeded, which is 7 to 10 or 8 to 12, whatever you want to say. They didn't hit their tailspin, Duke, until mid-January when they lost. I think it was 7 out of 8 games.
I'll also say Duke is sort of like the Patriots, where like if I'm on the road against Coach K or against Bill Belichick, like I that's an impressive win. I don't really care who's on the court.
They beat Duke, they beat Notre Dame, and again, 3rd game of the year, whatever it was. Notre Dame. I'm not saying Notre Dame's great, but like it's an early season team that you see teams trip up against. And then their big emphatic win was when they beat Rutgers by 20. At the time, Rutgers was number 15. People were talking about Rutgers finally making the top 10 for the first time in like forever. And then Rutgers since has gone down, but they've had plenty of injuries. Geo Baker, Amori, they've had a ton of injuries. I think Harper missed a couple games. So they beat Rutgers when Rutgers was being talked about being moved into the top 10. So you're 8-4 with that resume. How do you say that's garbage? I see that as a team who is playing to like a 7 to 10 seed, which is where I think they could end up if they continue to streak down the end. I want to know where your head's at with that.
Well, a couple things. You're like, I get the record. Like they had a good record of 8-4, but again. I mean, it's, you guys keep bringing up Gonzaga, and like, if they didn't have their non-conference schedule, what's the win in the WCC we'd look at and be like, that's a great win. And they'd be 20-0 in the WCC and they'd have a great record. But you look at the record and you'd be like, well, where's the great win that you can hang your hat on? And I just didn't see that with Michigan State early on. My second thing would be, the more I was thinking about it, I think teams like Michigan State, there's so much perception built in with them. And Tom Izzo has obviously built such a great program that when they don't even look half as good as they normally do,
That's true.
It might make them look even worse than they actually are.
So
I'll admit they might not have been as bad as I thought they were. But Joe, honestly, a big reason why I was just down on Michigan State for so much of this year is just watching Tom Izzo. He's usually such a fiery, competitive, pumping his arms coach. And you just watch him, and he just, for most of the games, he just sits there.
He did get killed a couple times for that last year, and that's been coming through my mind. I don't remember who the player was, but there was a couple times last year where he got in a guy's face, and he got some criticism for it. So I think he's tried to tone it. I think he's made a conscious effort to tone it down.
Davey has told me, too, that just from people in the program, he said that Tom, he hasn't coached this team as hard as other teams, but he's definitely realized that this team doesn't have as much talent as his other teams do. So his expectations aren't as what they normally would be.
Well, it's also like, I don't want to suggest that he doesn't care about this season or that he's not giving his best effort or anything like that. But I don't think we can overstate just how little we know about how the pandemic is affecting people.
And he got COVID.
There might, maybe he's not screaming at his players because he's like, they're all going through a really difficult once in a generation experience right now. I just, pretty much any question mark I have about a team's performance this year in any sport, I'm throwing out entirely.
And that was a big part of PJ, your argument last night when we were going back and forth, was that they had that game against Rutgers, Michigan State, where they lost 67-37. They put up 37 in a college basketball game, which is horrible. But again, you were failing to consider that was their first time they were on the court in 3 weeks. They couldn't play or practice because they had an outbreak. First time on the court in 3 weeks against a team who was starting to get some pieces back in Rutgers, who is really, really a tough team. And I don't want to see them in March, especially now that they're getting healthier and Geo Baker is going to heat up again. They were 26-20 down in that first half. Izzo came out afterwards and said, like, look, we haven't played or practiced in 3 weeks. We're missing guys, so we don't have our full rotation. We were dead in the second half. He admitted, like, the conditioning just wasn't there. Right. 26-20 at the half, and then I think they lost whatever it was, 31-17 or whatever, something crazy like that. Or no, sorry, if it was 41-17, they lost in the second half. Even so, like that Rutgers game, that's a big blemish because they just got demolished.
Right.
You can't, I don't even consider that game. And when it comes to the committee, like, I don't even think that game gets evaluated. Again, 3 weeks, missing players, no practice. That's going to happen. Like, what did you expect was going to happen?
Anecdotally, I don't think there's a sport that I would be less confident in a team coming off a COVID-induced break than college basketball. Just in terms of the players are so young, they need the practice time, they need the coaching. That's why coaching matters so much in college basketball. And it's a sport based on endurance, and you can't have dead legs or you can't shoot. I mean, I'm with you, Joe. I can't possibly hold that against them or any team in their first couple of games coming back from a COVID outbreak. I mean, it's not just at Rutgers. Their next two after that were at Ohio State and at Iowa.
And the Iowa game is when they started to look like themselves. They lost by, I think, like 6 on the road against a really good Iowa team. So that's when they started to kick it back into gear and get to where they are now. So I think that, again, it's a year we have to just take a step back, and instead of dismissing a team like that, you got to take into account all the things. And that's where I think it's going to get interesting down the stretch now. This was the last point before I wanted to let you go, Worm. When it comes to bracketology and the committee, I'm really curious to see how different, how when the committee releases their top 4 in each region, I'm curious to see how different that might look versus Lenardi and all these other guys, because I'm curious to see if the committee starts taking into account all right, team A, they had this month where they were just COVID ridden, and look at what they were before and after. All right, maybe they're only 12-9 right now, but I'm throwing away these 4 games. So in my eyes, they're really like a 12-5 team. Like, I wonder how off the projections of brackets are going to be from the actual ones, because we're not in that room. Well, I guess it's not a room this year. You can't be together, but we're not in that discussion of what is going to matter and what is not going to matter this year. Like, again, Michigan State being the prime example. Lenardi has them first 4 out. If the committee was meeting tomorrow, I would put my money on them putting them in, even though Lenardi and other people have them first 4 out right now, because I think they're going to sit down. Yes, the name on the front of the jersey is going to play a big role in that, but they're going to look at it and say, okay, we really could kind of throw out 3 games entirely. And we see what they've done now. We saw what they were before they were stricken with COVID. I think that's going to be a big factor down the stretch, where you're going to see more mistakes in bracketology than usual, because you don't know how the committee is going to evaluate these things.
It's never been tougher to be the committee, but it's also never been tougher to try and guess what the committee is going to do. And this is, in recent years, we have seen a shifting in how the committee evaluates teams in terms of relying more on these metrics like Ken Pom. Obviously, they went from the RPI to the net rankings that incorporated more efficiency rates instead of, and you know, where the wins come, quad 1, quad 2, stuff like that. So there already has been a shift in the mindset of the committee in recent years. And now we have to take in the COVID stuff. And it's not just like, oh, will they not include that loss to Rutgers? But do they count that as a win for Rutgers when they're evaluating Rutgers' profile? There's almost too much information to sort through. And I almost wonder if they just say, forget it. We can't possibly wrap our heads around every piece of COVID-related information. So we're just going to do our best to evaluate this as a normal season. I don't honestly know. And to your point about Michigan State, I mean, we spent the bulk of this debate about them talking about their early season stretch and when they came back from COVID. I think they're getting in because their last 2 games are wins over top 5 teams. I mean, they beat Illinois comfortably. They beat Ohio State. They are playing much better than they were. I absolutely think
they're
the committee
beat Maryland
is going to value that.
You could say it, Warren.
They will. They have a good chance of beating Maryland.
You guys know how pessimistic I am about Maryland all the time. I feel very good about Sunday. I don't know if I'm crazy.
The best thing that could have happened to them was actually Michigan State beating Ohio State. That was the best thing.
I feel very good about Maryland Sunday, and I never feel good about Maryland.
Joe, it's Izzo versus Turge, and the way they're looking, I just wouldn't.
The way they're playing right now, Michigan State, you think of this as a sandwich spot like you do in the NFL. They just beat Illinois. They just beat Ohio State. Coming up after Maryland is 2 games against arch rival Michigan. They've played a lot of games now in a short stretch. Maryland had the whole week off to rest the legs. Playing on Sunday, I feel good about Maryland on Sunday.
This is the spot you want to be if you're Maryland. I will give you that. But it's not in my DNA to feel confident about Mark Turgeon going up against Tom Izzo. I just can't. I
agree.
I literally, there's an obstacle, a force field in front of me. I cannot take that step.
I was good with pegging the Michigan State Maryland games last year. I called them winning on the road in East Lansing. I called Michigan State beating Maryland in the return game when Maryland had College Game Day on Leap Day last year. I feel very good.
I can't wait to see what that spread is. I bet it opens up at about Maryland -1.
I will say we haven't really talked about the Terps that much in this conversation. It's been more of a larger college basketball talk. But
my evaluation on the Terps, I think, is so spot on. It's all matchup based. They cannot score more than 70 points against a good team. If they play a team like Rutgers or Wisconsin or Purdue that they can keep it ugly with, they can beat them. If they play an elite offensive team, they can't beat that team.
I will say my biggest complaint about Turgeon over the years hasn't been his performance in March. It's been that his teams have been worse at the end of February than they were in the middle of January. They have seemingly gone downhill in just about every year. That's pretty concerning to me. This year, it's the opposite. If you look at Bart Torvik's rankings, it's like Ken Pom, but you can designate certain time frames. If you look at the whole season, they're like 41st. If you look at the last month, they're 20th. If you look at the last 2 weeks, they're 14th. That's a learning curve. This team is getting better. And if you look in the last month, they have the 4th most efficient defense in all of college basketball, even taking into consideration the teams they've played. So they are getting to an elite level defensively that we haven't seen from them really ever under Turgeon. And Turgeon is a good defensive coach. We've never seen them play defense like this. They're running their campaign. Laquan Smart and James Graham are trying to push for Daryl Morcell to be Defensive Player of the Year, which is fun to see. But the entire team is playing great defense. The offense is shooting better. Wiggins is playing like an All-American the last 2 weeks.
Well, that's the kid.
This team is a better team. It's not that they're playing better. It's not that they're just taking advantage of a lighter schedule. This is a better team today than they were a month ago. And that might be the first time we've been able to say that about a Turgeon team at the end of February.
I don't think they can get as high as a 6, but I hope they end up as a 6, 7, or fall to a 10, because I think they've got a much better chance, obviously, at a 2 or a 3 seed. The way it is now, they're on the 9 line. I don't want to be an 8 or 9, because if they're an 8 or 9, I don't feel confident, obviously, in getting past the second round. I don't think the committee is obviously going to try to keep them out of Ohio State and Michigan's region, so there's not a second round Big Ten matchup. So that means it's either going to be Baylor or Gonzaga, and I don't want that. So I'm hoping that they can either keep this run going, get to a 6, or lose a game or 2 and fall back to a 10, because then I think they could be they have a chance to get to the Sweet 16.
I agree. And that's the nice thing about having one at Rutgers is you can afford to lose to Michigan State now and still not fall off the bubble entirely. And in fact, still be on the right side of the bubble, probably. The last thing, I know I've sort of bogarted this whole show for you guys, but I do just want to say that it's kind of fun. I prefer if they were like a 3 seed, but it's kind of fun having Maryland on the bubble because we really haven't had that basically since they've gotten good under Turgeon. The first 3 years they were bad and they really weren't all that close, except for 1 year they kind of were, but of course they didn't make any tournaments in my 4 years there. And then Melo came and they were clearly in. There was no debate at all. It was what seed are they going to be, not whether or not they're in. Then we had the year where Justin Jackson got hurt and they were clearly out and not going to make it. They didn't even make the NIT. So this is the first year that it's actually, there's going to be some curiosity on Selection Sunday. Like in the back of my mind, are they actually going to make it? And I'm not 100% sure. And again,
and that's exciting to you.
It's adding gray hairs to my head, but it's just a refreshing, like it's
I'm not concerned unless they go 1-2 and lose in the first round of the Big Ten tournament. I don't even think it's a question anymore.
Turgeon, Maryland, Kansas, and Gonzaga are the only 3 teams in the last 2 years to not lose a game outside of Quad 1. So,
and Maryland is one of 13 teams that has 5 Quad 1 wins this year. Again, I don't see, unless they go 1-2 and lose in the first round, I don't see any way that they missed the tournament.
And I just don't see that happening.
I'm not saying it's impossible that doesn't happen. It could happen, but
I don't see that happening. I think if they go 1-2, I still would expect them to win the first game of the Big Ten tournament.
Of course, that's what I'm saying. I think they'll get past that first game. Well, Worm, you said you were sorry that you like bombarded us. This is what I had. I kept it as a surprise for PJ. This is what I had in mind of kind of like a 3-person show today because you're good at the topic. And
what'd you think of the college football point? Wasn't bad, right? You can see where I was going.
I think it's good, except for I didn't really harp on you enough about this. In college football, being top heavy as a conference just matters more than in college basketball. Like I'd rather have the depth in college basketball. But I think your comparison about the top 4 teams is actually pretty spot on.
So you got Pixar, you've been our Ravens full-time guest, and today you were a de facto third host. This is exactly what I envisioned.
Really? I'm not the resident Pixar concierge. I'm not the resident Ravens expert. I'm the resident surprise.
You are the resident surprise. You should put that in your Twitter bio, actually. Resident surprise. All right, Orm, thanks so much. You don't even got to listen to this week's episode because you were pretty much on it. You know what? Listen to the Grant interview. Stay tuned to listen to trivia, but you can just fast forward through the middle 40 minutes.
I can't wait to do just that.
Thanks, Orm.
See you guys.
Well, thanks again to Ryan Wormley for joining us. That was a nice little surprise, Joe. Well done. I got you when the Ravens played the Browns, and now you surprised me for college basketball.
There we go.
Because I texted you guys last night, and I was like, I have a great point about college.
And right after you said that, I was like, I got to have him on so he can hear it too. But plenty of obviously great college basketball again this weekend. And, the last couple of weeks we've been picking out which ones we've been looking at as the main matchups. And each week that we've done this, the last 2 weeks, the ones we've picked have turned out to be fantastic games. So hopefully we can make it 3 weeks in a row. Where are you going first for your main game that you're looking at?
Let's see. The main game, I mean, it's probably got to be Baylor and Kansas. You got to think if Baylor is going to go undefeated, that this in the Big 12, this would be their toughest game, not because Kansas is necessarily the best team that they'll play in the Big 12, but just because of Fog Allen and how tough it is to get a win in that building. It'll be in prime time, ESPN. Baylor, we saw how much they struggled with Iowa State off that COVID layoff. They easily could have lost that game. So are they still showing some effects from that, or are they back to their regular self? I think there's a lot of question marks from that game. Kansas has played better as of late. They lost a tough overtime game to Texas. So definitely that game intrigues me. And then the other Big 12 team, Texas Tech and Texas, two teams that, Texas.
You don't love them.
Don't love Texas. Extremely athletic. They can score points, but their guard play, Ramey and Matt Coleman, like they're good players, but Texas had a lot of good wins early on, but I feel like they're a team that is kind of fizzling out a little bit. Texas Tech, we both love us some Chris Beard. We love Mac McClung. On paper, Texas Tech should be really good, and they're a team that you probably do not want to see in March, but Texas Tech too. I watch them and I want more. Last week when we were doing this, I told you that Texas Tech Kansas would probably be a game that I'd look forward to, but I just don't think Kansas would give them much of a game, and Kansas beat them outright. So
I think Kansas has been playing well, and I think Texas Tech has taken a little bit of a dip defensively.
Yeah.
And you talk about wanting to peak at the right time. If they're going to hit their dip, I'm glad it's now, because knowing what we know about Chris Beard and how great of a coach he is, I think hitting this dip now, these last couple regular season games, especially with a tough test against Texas, they start coming out of that dip and that trajectory starts going up again, going into the Big 12 tournament and beyond. I think they hit their dip at a good time, and this is a good week to go ahead and get out of it. That was my main game I was looking at. But beyond that, Illinois at Wisconsin, a Wisconsin team that has kind of just clung to the top 25 the whole season. They got as high as the top 10. Maryland beat them when they were number 5. They dipped out for a second. They're back in at 23. They're a pesky team, 9 seniors in the rotation. At home against Illinois, Ayo Dosunmu with the facial fracture. Don't know exactly how much time he's going to miss. Hopefully he's back quick for a team that has Final Four aspirations. Looking at that game to see if Wisconsin can pad their resume a little bit. And then obviously the 2 Big 10 games on Sunday. I was going to say big 10 games. That would have sounded weird, but you get what I mean. The Maryland game against Michigan State, we already touched on that with Worm. And then Iowa against Ohio State. 2 teams right now that the perception around them has changed maybe a little bit after yesterday. Iowa got blitzed against Michigan. We said last week that it's Baylor, Gonzaga, and then Michigan in their own class, and then everybody else. The gap between Baylor and Gonzaga and then Michigan is a lot smaller than the gap between Michigan and everybody else.
Michigan can win the whole thing. Absolutely.
So the perception around Iowa may be a little bit different after getting blitzed against Michigan, even though they're one of those top teams. Perception of Ohio State after their really hot streak, changed a little bit after losing last night to Michigan State. 2 teams coming off of a loss. One of them is going to lose a second game in a row. Who is it going to be? So that's a game that I'm really looking at this week as well. And PJ, it's that time of year. We're getting down the stretch now where every single game is huge.
Definitely. One more game too in the SEC, LSU at Arkansas, maybe the second and third best teams in the SEC. Arkansas just had a big win against Alabama. They beat Missouri last week. They've won 8 straight games in the SEC. LSU could really use one more big win. They should be in, but you win at Arkansas, and you are definitely a lock to make the NCAA tournament. 2 great offensive teams, so I'm looking forward to seeing that game.
The last one I'll say, as far as teams that might be on upset alert this week, I'm looking at 7 and 8 for the upset alerts here. You look at Oklahoma at home against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma's 7. Oklahoma State's not ranked. Oklahoma State has been giving teams fits, and Cade Cunningham playing the way he's playing, that's a game that I'm really looking forward to on Saturday, 3 o'clock ABC. And the other one, Sunday, Butler home against Villanova. Butler is below 500 by, I think, 5 games. They just beat Seton Hall the other night, which is a big game for the bubble. Butler at home, tough. And they've been dealing with some injuries. But the Big East, it flies under the radar, but those teams beat up on each other every single night. Yeah. And it wouldn't shock me if Villanova turned in a less than stellar performance. I think Villanova wins, but Butler's going to keep that game a lot closer than people think.
Look, every time Villanova plays, they know they're getting everybody's best shot. Joe, we've been giving each other our best shot at trivia.
Yes.
And let's see. Are we tied
We're
up?
15-15.
15-15. We are indeed.
Because we got rid of the half
correct.
points last week.
I'll go first because it's sticking with the theme of really a majority of our show, college basketball. Real simple for you, Joe. If you can give me, let's see. So I have 6 written down of the longest NCAA tournament streaks currently still going. The top 5 is pretty easy, but then that 6th one's the tricky one. But if you can give me 5 of the 6, I'll give it to you.
5 of the 6 are the teams that have made the most consecutive, you mean?
Correct. Most consecutive tournaments, yes.
All right. I'm going to start with active streaks, correct?
Active, correct.
Active streaks.
Yep.
I'm going to start with Duke.
Duke, yep. They're second,
Okay.
24.
Michigan State.
Michigan State, yep. 22.
Okay.
Number 3.
Villanova.
Not Nova.
Okay.
They were 7th.
Kansas is probably number 1.
They are 30 straight.
Okay, 3. Now, Kentucky is in my mind. I want to say though that in the middle of their run when they went to a couple of Final Fours, I think there was a down year where they went to the NIT. So I'm going to hold off on Kentucky until I absolutely have to. I'm going to say Gonzaga.
Yes. Gonzaga, 4-20 straight. So you just need one more, one of the two.
They don't play enough talent where they would have missed in a given year.
There was one year it was close. They were like an 11 seed when Kyle Wiltshire was there. That was their closest year, but they made it.
All right. So
40 seconds left. You just need one more. You got 2 strikes to work with.
North Carolina is the same thing for me, like Kentucky, where I'm not entirely sure. I think they might have had a down year. In the Pac-12, everybody out there has cycled through bad years. I don't think it could possibly be somebody in the Pac-12. Big East, Nova was my only shot. It's a no for them. SEC, outside of Kentucky, I don't think there's one. And then as far as just general at-large teams that are
you got 10 seconds left.
All right, I'm going to say Kentucky and UNC and hope it's one of the two.
You are correct. It is UNC. Kentucky was incorrect, but you got the Tar Heels. So they were the other team tied for 5th with UNC with 9 consecutive was Cincinnati. All those Mick Cronin teams that were good. And then, so they're not going to make it this year unless they win the AAC. But yeah, so well done. So you got 16.
I know in that stretch there was like down years for both teams, and I'm glad I said
it was like Calipari's first year at Kentucky. They were terrible, and then they obviously got John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins, and have not looked back until this season.
All right, PJ, for you can go back and pick out teams on the lines they were on for like the last 5 NCAA tournaments if you looked at it. So I don't think this one's too hard for you. I got it. Like I said, whenever I try to give you a question, I try to do it first. In the last decade, this is still a viable question because there was no 2020 tournament. Right. So in the last 10 tournaments from 2010 to 2019, I want you to give me 7 of the 10 most outstanding players of the tournament.
All right, it's 2010. Kemba.
Kemba was 2011, yep.
Anthony Davis.
2012.
Russ Smith.
Incorrect, strike 1.
So I'll go Peyton Siva.
Incorrect, strike 2. That's the one that surprised me and was one of my strikes when I was going through it. I was stunned at that one.
Unbelievable. So I have 2 strikes already. All right, let's see.
Think more recent. Go from back to early.
I mean, those Villanova teams, the most outstanding players, like is it DiVincenzo? I'll go DiVincenzo.
DiVincenzo's correct in 2018. You've got 3. You need to get 4 more, and you are 35 seconds in.
So the most outstanding player is the player of the game for the championship, or it's the entire tournament?
Tournament.
Okay. Let's see. So the other Nova title, that was the Chris Jenkins shot, but he wouldn't have won it. North Carolina teams with Page. Oh, the North Carolina team that won it against Gonzaga. It might have been Justin Jackson. I'll go Justin Jackson.
Justin Jackson was not the most outstanding player that year. It was Joel Berry II.
Who was the other Villanova team? Who was that year?
It was Ryan Arcidiacono.
It was Archie. Okay. And then the Duke teams, I would have said Tyus Jones.
Tyus Jones was correct.
All right. And then let's see. Who
Duke
else? UConn wanted it. Oh, Shabazz was the other one.
Shabazz was the other one, yep. Yep.
But I wouldn't have got because Louisville tripped me up. Who's the year with Louisville?
It was Luke Hancock on that team that got it.
Wow.
It was Luke Hancock. Going back, when I was doing this, like I said, I got both Villanovas in Arcidiacono and DiVincenzo because I thought they were the same player for the long. I was like,
Right.
I did not get Joel Berry. I did not get Luke Hancock. I did not remember 2010 Kyle Singler, but I got Kemba in 11, Anthony Davis in 12, Shabazz in 14, Tyus Jones in 15, both of the Nova guys, Joel Berry and Kyle Guy. Kyle Guy in 2019 for Virginia.
Yeah, right. Yeah, see, and I might have said Hunter for Virginia. I don't know if I
good
was the
too.
guy.
I definitely think about that controversial game against Auburn down the stretch.
Yeah, definitely.
He was big down the stretch in a lot of those games.
Well done. That was a good one. Yeah, Louisville. The fact it's not Smith or Siva is an upset. That's shocking. All right. Well done. Thanks again to Grant Paulsen for joining us. Great to talk to him and have him come on the pod. Thanks again to Ryan Wormley coming on for Talks College Hoops. And Joe, next time we do this, not only is it in March, but it'll be episode 40 as well.
This will be March, and it will be episode 40.
I cannot wait until February 28th at 11:59 p.m. Just waiting for those seconds to count down until midnight.
And John Rothstein probably already.
He will be ready to roll.
Sweet.
That's right.
All right. Until next time, Joe Malfa, PJ Glasser. Catch us next week, episode 40 in March.